Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We are part of the Collaborative Network to End Exploitation, and today's webinar is part of the Do No Harm series. And first, I would like to start with land acknowledgement. Toronto has been a home to many nations since time immemorial. These include the Huron, Wendat, and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. These nations were harmed by the arrival of European settlers who have systematically tried to erase these indigenous communities and their teachings. Colonialism and racism are deeply entrenched in the Canadian state, and Collaborative Network to End Exploitation strives to decolonize our work and make a positive contribution to the reconciliation process. Please feel free to put in the chat the territories you are joining in. And I will continue with the labor acknowledgement. As well, we would like to acknowledge the labor and sacrifices of poor and racialized workers on those lands. Canada settler colonial history includes, among others, the exploitation of labor of over 200 years of enslaving African and Indigenous peoples, charging an immigration head tax on any person of Chinese origin, agricultural and other migrant workers indentured to their employers with closed work permits. These and other violent practices allow Canada to accumulate wealth and power. Canada continues to profit from the historic and ongoing exploitation of poor and racialized people, and CNE is committed to redress this legacy. Very quickly, because you have lots of work today, I would like to go through the housekeeping. I just want to say that through today's session, through the most part, you will be muted and the chat will be disabled for the presentation portion. You may privately message me and all other co-hosts, and the chat feature will be turned on after the presentation during questions and discussion. For the Maddi's part of the presentation also, she has 2 questions and she would like to engage people in some discussion. So for those 2 questions, the chat will be open for people to engage. And we also are recording this, and you will have the access to the recording later. And finally, we have a closed captioning, and card captions are available and can be turned on at any time you need them. Today, as I said, today's webinar is part of a series, and today we're going to talk about anti-human trafficking work with people with developmental disabilities. And without wasting much time, let's go to the group assumptions. And we are already familiar with the topic of human trafficking and what anti-human trafficking work entails. Also, all of us, we are here with good intentions because we want to learn more. And finally, we understand that discomfort is part of what makes us grow. Okay, let's go to today's presenters. I'm very honored to present to you Maddi Doerrl. Maddi is a disability advocate who is finishing her general arts and science program and is set to go into the developmental service worker program at her local college. Maddi uses her lived experience of being a survivor of human trafficking as well as being on the autism spectrum to help educate those around her about the harms of anti-human trafficking work within her community. I want to introduce also Shelley. Shelley Gilbert. She has worked at Legal Assistance of Windsor since 1993 and is currently the coordinator of the social work services. She is responsible for social work services and community development initiatives within Legal Assistance of Windsor. She is facilitating and leading the delivery of interdisciplinary services at Legal Assistance of Windsor. As well, she is developing initiatives to fill identified needs, enhance community capacities, and promote social justice. Before I give the floor to Shelley, who will start the presentation, I just want to acknowledge that there's a significant gap within the research of the intersectionality between human trafficking and disabilities. So that's why I am so grateful for both Shelley and Maddi to be here and to join us and share with us their expertise. Okay, Shelley, I'm sharing my I'm sharing my screen, so you can go.
Thank you, everyone. I am going to find my presentation. Here we go. And oh, I've already. Thanks again. Thank you for having me today. Again, my name is Shelley Gilbert, and I work at a community legal clinic, as Barca said, Legal Assistance of Windsor. And so one of the projects that we run is called the Windsor Essex Counter Exploitation Network, or WeCan. And it's recently a new name change to try to reflect the work that we're doing alongside in collaboration with internationally and domestically trafficked or exploited people. So you see here that we provide direct services to internationally and domestically trafficked people in all different industries, and try and use a really collaborative, trauma-informed case management approach to working with individuals, and really try and consider the various intersectionalities that people bring, that people share with us, so that we can recognize those intersectionalities, including people's disabilities, and try and enhance strengths and mitigate some of the vulnerabilities that others have used in exploiting people. The other thing that we work really hard at doing is really developing, and I was glad that Barcus talked about growth is, you know, or sometimes discomfort causes our growth and contributes to our growth, because that's really one of the things that our project really focuses on with our community partners. It's really talking about what should protocols look like between organizations on behalf and alongside trafficked people, recognizing the intersectionalities that people bring to the table. We provide a lot of public education, so I'm very happy to be here with you today. And of course, with community partners, with national partners, provide and work towards systemic advocacy and protections for internationally and domestically trafficked people. The organizations that you see here are our local steering committee that are really focused on keeping us honest and looking at what are the needs of trafficked people, what are the trends that we're seeing, and how do we amend our protocols and our policies. And I think Maddi is going to do a really good job today of talking about that need, but amending those protocols and policies so that we are supporting trafficked people in the way that makes the most sense for them. So as I said today, I'm really going to give a very brief overview of trauma-informed practice, focusing on intersectionality, including disability, and then allow Maddi to give some really excellent examples of practical application of trauma-informed practice and some of the difficulties and harm that can come to people when we're not recognizing those intersectionalities. These trauma-informed principles speak to really a changing culture of what's traditionally been called the professional relationship. Very often, the systems involved with people living with disabilities and the individuals working in those systems establish professional relationships with clients that have been very purposefully issue or presenting problem related, and solutions have been created on behalf of an individual. So solutions have been created and implemented all around people, but not including him or her. However, people with disabilities are not one-dimensional. One intersectionality does not make a person. Disabilities are along a spectrum, and intersecting experiences, cultures, race, religion, socioeconomic status, immigration status, and most specifically trauma, comes together and impacts the people we work with and the relationships with us and with others. So what we've now recognized is that operationalizing these principles in various ways helps our professional relationship, helps our ability to provide the best support and representation as possible to people. What we've seen is that people are often willing and able to participate in a process, a legal process or a psychosocial process, when these principles are combined with good case analysis and legal and social work skills. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, when we look at the elements of human trafficking, we know exploited people or traffickers exploit the intersectionalities of a person. They make intersectionalities vulnerabilities. Being a person with a disability is not itself a vulnerability. It shouldn't be a vulnerability. Being a racialized person should not be a vulnerability. But these vulnerabilities these intersectionalities are often exploited by traffickers, by exploited people. But the exploiter turns that intersectionality, that trafficker manipulates that intersectionality, often through lies, through deceptions, and into something that they can exploit to lure or coerce someone into compliance. As we know, most times people are lured through deception, through lies, through trickery of some sort. And at some point in that relationship between the trafficked person and their trafficker, at some point in that relationship, coercion and control begins to be exerted upon that person in order to exploit them. So it's important for us to, I think, recognize these as factors and the elements of human trafficking, and not to focus on the type of human trafficking. We've had the privilege of working with people in, as I said, all different industries with all different types of intersectionalities. So although there is a focus, and we're going to talk about sex trafficking today, I think it's really important for us to focus on these factors and recognize that these intersectionalities could be exploited in every different industry. Yes, the sex trade for sure, but also we've worked with people with disabilities, for instance, who have also been forced to panhandle, who have been forced to work in other forms of labor and other industries. And now we're sort of looking at and have really identified certain individuals, and very often they are people with some form of disability who are being victims of what we're calling housing unit takeovers. And people are moving in for various reasons into particular, usually social housing units, but not necessarily, and then are taking over that person's unit and maybe applying some other trade out of the unit. So really thinking about different forms of trafficking, different ways that people can be exploited for profit, but really trying to focus on the factors and whether these elements are apparent in each individual circumstance. So I really wanted to try and focus on those as we go forward. It's our job then to apply trauma-informed practices in ways that don't further disability as a vulnerability, but focus our activities, our interventions that respect and respond to the intersectionalities of our client, including their disability. If we're reflecting on and using trauma-informed practice principles, we are establishing a relationship in which our client is able to process decisions that they're making for themselves with us. And I think that that is part of the most important piece of the journey, is allowing people to have the understanding with lack of judgment, without being penalized in any way, that they can process their decision-making and talk to us about why and how they're coming to make decisions about their own lives. We're in a position to help people think through why and how they're making these decisions, even when we disagree with those decisions. The individuals we work with know and need to understand that they have agency, and we must respect that agency to decide and understand that we won't judge them or control them through the work we do with them. It's our job to assess each of the potential factors and ensure people have agency to determine and to articulate in the best way for them their experience, to participate in their own safety. When we do this, we have to be aware of our own biases. For myself, as a white, middle-aged, middle-income woman, I have to reflect on the privilege that I have and recognize and respect the choices and decisions made by anyone I work with, regardless of their disability and the intersectionalities. It's our job to determine how an intersectionality is being used or exploited, and then, in collaboration with our person, determine ways to mitigate or prevent that from continuing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shelley. So please think about questions, and you're going to have the chance to ask them at the end. Thank you so much, Shelley, for acknowledging that while developing responses, in most instances, people with disabilities are not included in the development of those responses, and also acknowledging that the disability is only one intersectionality of the social identity that makes people. Maddi, feel free to share your screen. And as I said, think about questions. You can send them to me meanwhile, while the chat is closed. I will open the chat while Maddi is asking the questions she wants you to engage in.
Can everyone see my screen?
Can you make a full screen? We can see it, yes.
I acknowledge that the disability community is extremely diverse and that I can only speak on my own expertise. 2, I acknowledge that the disability community is often left out of the conversation of anti-human trafficking work. And 3, today I will present case studies of real human trafficking cases of people with developmental disabilities, and I've gotten permission to share them with you. So I would like to ask what first comes to mind when I say developmental disability. And you can just put that in the chat box.
I can read the messages for you, Maddi, if you want. So people are saying that diversity could be so many different things. Then others are saying academic learning challenges. Caroline is saying people who may struggle in areas that I do not, as an able-bodied, I guess. Then Milan is saying about 1% of Ontarians have developmental disabilities. Cognitive differences, gaps in comprehension, challenges with learning as an example, and so on.
So yeah, we have a pretty good understanding of what it is. So I'm just going to explain further. So developmental disabilities are a group of conditions due to an impairment in physical, learning, language, and behavioral areas. These conditions begin during the development period and may impact day-to-day functioning and usually last throughout the person's lifetime. Examples of developmental disorders include, but are not limited to, autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, ADD, conduct disorders, intellectual disabilities, oppositional defiant disorder, stuttering, and Tourette syndrome. Why talk about developmental disabilities when we talk about anti-human trafficking work? When it comes to individuals with a developmental disability, they are at increased risk of being victimized by traffickers. For an example, a small study done in Florida in 2018 found that 28% of trafficking cases involved people with intellectual disabilities, compared to the national average of prevalence of intellectual disabilities being only 1 to 3%. People with developmental disabilities often need to rely on other people to meet their basic needs. Therefore, the people who are helping the person meet their basic needs also have the opportunity to traffic them as a result of their close contact and trust with the person. Some people with developmental disabilities cannot speak clearly or require communication devices or interpreters to meet their needs known, make their needs known to people, which means that they can't always ask for help. People with developmental disabilities may lead isolated lives and crave friendship or human connection. Due to this need, they may be at risk of being persuaded to perform sexual acts or they are promised friendship or money in return. This isolation can make it difficult for them to be able to contact people who would be able to help them. Due to the level of touching that often accompanies care and medical procedures, people with developmental disabilities can often become desensitized to touch or unsure about whether they have the right to object or report unwanted touch, sexual abuse, and sexual acts. They may also lack the knowledge and understanding of what constitutes a crime and what their rights as a victim are. So I'm going to talk about Charlotte. Charlotte is a 21-year-old female who has autism spectrum disorder, profound hearing loss, and a multitude of physical disabilities. Charlotte is an AAC user and needs support from her caregivers to complete daily living tasks. Despite Children's Services, facts, concerns, and opening of case around Charlotte's second birthday, her mother had already began trafficking her. While school age, she was regularly taken out of school under the guise of medical appointments. The school often concerned about the various bruises and unusual marks on Charlotte's body and would ask questions to her mother. Her mother's response would always be that she had injured herself falling due to her medical conditions or engaging in self-destructive behaviors due to her ASD diagnosis. Due to Charlotte's developmental disabilities, communication was difficult for her, which made it hard for teachers and EAs and other professionals involved to understand what was going on. As the school noticed signs of trauma and abuse, as well as visible signs of discomfort, especially when Charlotte was being changed, the school staff repeatedly reported their concerns to CPS. CPS workers told the staff to stop calling because it was already an open file. Unfortunately, CPS was unable to discern between the results of the disabilities and the signs of trauma. Charlotte continued to be trafficked by her mother for 11 years. In the fall of 2013, Charlotte's neighbors, concerned for her well-being, called the police to the home. The officer was not believing the story that Charlotte's mother was telling her. The officer did not agree and decided to speak directly to Charlotte as she noticed what was happening, and Charlotte was able to express some of what was happening. This led to the officer taking her to the nearest children's emergency hospital. This is where it was finally determined that Charlotte was physically and sexually abused. Finally, Charlotte was removed from her mother's home and placed in foster care. Unfortunately, Charlotte was further abused during the wait between foster care and placement with the Developmental Services Ontario, DSO. It is crucial to note that the abuse continued due to her inability to understand danger and exploitation. Charlotte was eventually placed with the DSO and is now thriving today with the right support, though she still requires around-the-clock assistance with life skills and activities of daily living. Charlotte is continuously being taught safety awareness and how to identify abuse. Her developmental and intellectual disabilities are always going to pose a risk to further harm and abuse. as well as exploitation. So it is paramount that these skills be taught and revisited regularly. What can we learn from Charlotte's case study?
That is enabled, so please feel free to leave your comments. What are the main learnings from Charlotte's case? Shelley is saying that you have to find a way to listen to the person with disabilities. And this is a very important first step. David is saying don't make assumptions. It's important to continue voicing concerns and not assume if it is reported once, the proper follow-up will occur, and so on.
Case study, Charlotte reflection. We can't always rely on caregivers' information about injuries sustained. There are large gaps in anti-human trafficking work when it comes to what a victim of human trafficking looks like. Developmental disabilities are recognized population affected by human trafficking. Her case shows us that anyone can be a victim of human trafficking, even a 2-year-old. It shows us how hard it can be for CPS to help child trafficking victims due to the burden of proof requirement. Things that could have helped Charlotte. CPS workers adequately trained in recognizing the signs of human trafficking in a child with disabilities. An example of this would be self-harm versus physical abuse. Giving Charlotte appropriate tools and vocabulary to express what is happening to her in age-appropriate ways. Example, using AAC programmed with available wording. Training for teachers and educational assistants on human trafficking. Training for police. Example, trauma-informed ways to intervene when abuse is suspected, how intellectual disabilities affect a person's ability to verbalize what is happening. Anti-human trafficking work and the harm it can cause to survivors who have developmental disabilities. Survivors of human trafficking who have developmental disabilities currently have little agency in what happened to them after trafficking. They're often told what is best for them, even if it causes more pain in the end. People with developmental disabilities aren't always believed if they report the abuse or violence, as their disability can mask the effects. Oftentimes, if they are believed, lack of procedural accommodations reduce the likelihood of prosecution. Survivors are often asked to leave places that they are supposed to be supported due to their increased need for accommodation. Different approaches to daily tasks. Example, OCD is often a co-occurrent disorder in people with ASD. Safe houses might have shared house duties among the attendants. OCD may not be clearly understood during the intake process and therefore cause great distress when attendants with these disorders are asked to complete duties, such as bathroom cleaning. Trying to work out a solution to address this is much better than trying to force them to do it with the ultimatum that this is what everyone must do here. While it is good to step out of your comfort zone for some things, cleaning a bathroom is not a comfort zone that should be or is able to be stepped out of without severe distress. This increased need for care is often hard to obtain for individuals because of how diverse and complex it can become. It is hard to employ people who have the knowledge of and understanding of both human trafficking and developmental disabilities, who also don't have unconscious bias around disabilities and human trafficking. We're going to look at another case study of Alice. Alice was a 16-year-old girl with autism spectrum disorder. Due to a breakdown in the family, Alice was taken to a youth shelter 30 minutes from her family's home. This is where Alice, with the help of a youth transition worker, helped her get a room to rent in the area. Shortly thereafter, she was lured into trafficking. The youth and transition worker was not doing regular check-ins with Alice because she appeared to have transitioned easily. However, this was actually due to Alice's inability to express her needs. She was very shy and quiet, and she always said, "I'm fine." This lack of interaction left Alice vulnerable and without the skills she needed to recognize danger. For 2 years, Alice endured the abuse of trafficking until, by happenstance, she connected with a support worker through the Salvation Army and gained access to a safe house for youth victims of trafficking. Due to her unable to understand dangers, she continued to be influenced by her traffickers. This led to Alice to be asked to leave the safe house for not following the rules, even at the age of 18. Alice was still unable to understand danger. This led to many different placements at safe houses and shelters, each ending with Alice being asked to leave because she was not following the rules. Eventually, Alice was granted a spot in a residential program for human trafficking victims in Vancouver, British Columbia. This is where she was finally able to stay for 6 months and benefit from the program they offered there. What can we learn from Alice's case study?
While people are thinking and giving their comments, I want to say something important in the chat. Somebody said that, and this is also related to this case, that we need to find a way to distinguish between signs of trauma and what is behaviors related to the disability. I'm sorry, I cannot follow all the chat messages. They are great. I'll just read few. So Nadia is saying the importance of relationship and trust building for those providing assistance. That just because they are at a safe house, they aren't necessarily free from harm. Alice would have benefited from in-person interactions and probing questions, even after the statement of "I am fine." Thank you so much for your comments.
Yeah, thank you. Case study with Alice reflection. Silence does not mean things are okay. Engaging with your client on a regular basis is important, even if it's a one-sided conversation. A person with a developmental disability can be unsuccessful if they don't have the right support they need in place, even if they seem like they're able to live on their own with minimal supports. Having programming safe houses that allows for individuals to learn life skills at the skill level they are at is essential for the success of the client. Things that could have helped Alice sooner. Having safe houses teach life skills in a manner that Alice was able to understand: internet safety, dangers of meeting strangers online, etc., in a way that made it easy for Alice to understand. Having staff at the safe house educated on human trafficking of persons with disabilities. To being accommodating when rules need to be adjusted. Example, household duties could have be arranged differently, such as doubling up on a task and eliminating one that is too difficult. The staff at the safe house in Vancouver. The staff often educated themselves on her disability. They taught her skills in ways that she was able to understand, and they understood that her disability allowed her not to understand danger or safety risks. Things to consider when assisting survivors with developmental disabilities. People with developmental disabilities may not present to caregivers like the preconceived representations of human trafficking. People with developmental disabilities may not know what is happening to them is wrong, much less a serious crime. Every survivor of human trafficking with a developmental disability will deal with the trauma differently. Not every survivor will choose to report to the police. This could be for many reasons, such as a bad history with the criminal justice system and their awareness of preconceived thoughts and feelings about them. Every survivor of human trafficking who has a developmental disability deserves personal autonomy. When assisting survivors with developmental disability, it can be easy to think that they lack the ability to make their own decisions. This is, of course, untrue. A large portion of people with a developmental disability can make clear and sound decisions. They may just need help with deciding what the best available option is for them, especially if they are under extreme amounts of distress. Often overlooked distressing factors, in addition to the trafficking, are things such as overstimulation, sensory overstimulation, bright lights, being asked too many questions at once, too many people at once, and an inability to articulate their feelings at the moment. It can be extremely empowering for survivors to have the ability to make their own choices when it comes to their treatment/care plan, instead of having people tell them what is best for them, something that people with developmental disabilities live with on a continuous basis. When someone who has a developmental disability discloses a potential human trafficking situation to a trusted adult, it is usually the first reaction to call the police. This can be helpful in assisting the individual and their support system with the situation. However, the person disclosing should be asked if they are okay with the police involvement before the person involves law enforcement. If the survivor does not want to involve law enforcement, there are still many options for them to get the help they need. For example, getting them in touch with victim services, applying for addiction support, getting them connected with peer support agencies and counseling, as well as accessing safe housing. Allow them to have a control throughout the entire process. If they don't want to continue anymore, don't try to pressure them into continuing. It is important to allow the person to go at their own pace when getting support, as it could overwhelm them. Too much too soon can harm the process. Do no harm approaches to exploitation of people with developmental disabilities. 1, allow for education early on about what healthy and safe relationship is. 2, introduce education about what sexual exploitation is at an age-appropriate way. Educate people who have close contact to individuals with disabilities on the risk of exploitation. Prevention is early recognition is key. Allow survivors to lead the way in what they want to do with the situation. We are able to do so. 2, allow the survivor to choose what they want and what they do not want. We can make decisions as well. 3, allow the survivor to ask as many questions as they would like. Information helps us make informed decisions. 4, don't tell the survivor what you think is best unless they ask for your opinion. 5, allow for the survivor to have as much time as they need to be able to process the information that is being provided. Sometimes this takes longer than expected. Don't claim that that you know everything about developmental disabilities. Don't say that you understand something because you have a close contact who has the same same developmental disability as the person you are supporting. Each person with the same disability is unique in their own way. Do acknowledge that you're hearing what the person is saying, and by using active listening. 2, educate yourself. It is not the person's responsibility with the developmental disorder to educate you on their own disorder. Educating yourself shows the client that you're sincerely trying to help them and builds trust. 3, don't assume the person with the disability is trying to cause problems. Remember that overstimulation reduces a person with disabilities' ability to think clearly. Negative reactions are often more to do with unarticulated underlying situations than the task or conversation at hand. Patience, space, and time allows the individual to regroup and better explain the issue. Thank you so much for listening and sharing your time with me.
Thank you so much, Maddi. Thank you so much for acknowledging the diversity within the community of people with disabilities. Thank you also for acknowledging the agency of people with disability to make their own decisions and to acknowledging their own situations they're living in, and also pointing to people who are supporting people with disabilities. That is the most harm they will do is to point out, what the person should do. to tell them what they should do. So I want to open the floor for questions. I will open also the chat. I will try to follow the chat. And I'm sorry if I miss some questions. And while you are thinking about about what you want to ask, you can use the chat. Also, you can use the mic. But I wanted to go back to one important comment that was made here in the chat, and then there was a question also asked. So somebody said, important to establish rules that fit the individual's needs and not make the individual fit the rules, which are often arbitrary. In the second case of Alice, where she was moved to different shelters, and the experience of shelters can be very tough for people with different intersectionalities. And I think Shelley asked the question, how can policies and protocols change to reflect the needs of an individual? How are those needs assessed? So Shelley, you can answer your own question. Maddi, you can jump in, or and the floor is open for questions. So Shelley, if you want to start and give us some ideas, how can policies and protocols can be bent, I would say, or flexed so they can accommodate different abilities.
Yeah, I think that's, part of, the job that we have is to first look at the strengths and needs of the people that are coming to us, and then to advocate and talk about with our community partners those strengths and needs when we're facilitating those referrals, and really have conversations with our community partners about those strengths and needs and where barriers may come into play for that particular person. And Maddi's examples were really, really excellent when you talk about particular house rules and how those house rules, the person isn't necessarily trying to defy the house rule, but they don't fit their particular needs and the challenges that they're living with. So how does an advocate, how do we help the individuals that we're working with articulate those needs? And then how do we come together to amend particular protocols so that they're individually based and not just an overall blanket policy? Because I think more and more of us are starting to recognize that although we might have a mandate for a particular population of individuals, the individuals that's in that population come with all different intersectionalities, different disabilities, different experiences, and so the policies need to reflect that as well. And it means having some really hard conversations and advocating at times for the needs of the individuals that we're working with and helping them to advocate effectively for themselves in the best way that they can.
Thank you so much. Maddi, if you want to add something, you're welcome. And also participants, people feel free to speak on the mic as well. There are a few comments in the chat. Somebody said that it's amazing, very informative and well presented. Thank you so much. Maddi, thank you so very much for this presentation. It's long past due. And I think you're right, whoever made this question, this comment, because the research, there's such a gap in the research and practices when it comes to people with different disabilities. And that's why I said at the beginning, I'm grateful to Shelley and Maddi sharing their knowledge with us. So somebody said here, yes, go ahead.
No. I was just going to mention Natalia's question there. But I think you're going
yes, is it okay to keep talking or going over again safety and how to recognize danger and abuse with someone who has a developmental disability, developmental disorder?
Yeah, I think that going over safety again and again helps ingrain it into people with developmental disabilities brain, because it can often be hard for people to get that information and apply it to their lives over and over again without getting it refreshed in their brain.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we want to think about is reflect, and when we look at the trauma-informed practice principles and reflect on the process for providing that information is as important, you know, as the information itself, right? So the process of using it includes all of those trauma-informed practice principles so that people recognize why that's coming to them again, how that's helpful, and they are able to, perhaps, you know, talk about it as well, because their understanding of this may be based in particular experiences. So we can talk to people about how you apply that in your day-to-day life, right? And allow the person to articulate and ask questions about certain circumstances that they find in their day-to-day life, and help to reinforce that message, as Maddi said. But I think, you know, we really want to think about not just giving the information, which of course is crucially important, but the process that we use to give that information to people so that they recognize it as a form of concern for them and a helpful process and not imposed upon them. If that makes sense.
That makes total sense. Maddi, there's a question for you here. Somebody asked, Maddi, how do you think that a staff member can ask the questions that need to be asked? Do you know how? Oh, and then this same person, they continued, that do you know how the two women in the cases are doing now? So
yeah, so staff members could ask and just like open-ended questions, but if the person isn't able to answer open-ended questions, have it directly asked. So for example, like if someone was having trouble with cleaning the bathroom, the person could ask, why are you having trouble cleaning the bathroom? Is there a specific reason why this is an issue for you? And then if the person is able to, they would elaborate why they're having the issue. But if they're not able to elaborate because their emotions are too heightened, I would give the person time and space to gather their emotions and collect their thoughts. And then the person could come back to you later, or you could address them afterwards. And the two women are in the case studies are doing really good right now. One is living on her own and is being supported by staff daily. And the other one is in college. So
there is another question. Shelley, jump in if you want to jump in.
I was just going to say that, you know, when part of what we want to try and do, and part of the trauma-informed practice principles, is that piece around collaboration. So very often when we're asking those questions around, you know, it might be challenges that people are having, it might be around their sobriety in another circumstance, is explaining why you're asking that question. And often the reason you're asking those questions is because you're concerned and you're worried. And so, and you want to make sure that you're doing everything that you can to support that person. And I think when we frame the questions with why we're asking those questions, it helps people to, again, feel that it's not coming, your questions are not coming from judgment, but they're coming out of concern and wanting to collaborate and work with your person around their safety. So I think that the way that we ask those questions and explaining why we're asking them, what we're seeing that is making us concerned for their well-being, may help to allow that person to explain to us what is actually going on.
There's another question, so both of you feel free to answer. Are there any tools that can help us assess the needs of a person with disability? That's what I point out, that the research is so lacking. There's such a gap, and there's no even when I was researching for myself, there were no much ideas, or because of the diversity within the disability community. So I'm not sure if both of you can point to something that is existing online, or I guess Maddi here, you gave so many tips and that people can apply in their daily basis when they work with people with disabilities.
Yeah, so I know there are some tools to assess like people's risk of being like victimized through some scoring tools I don't know the names of. I know that DSO does a really good job at like assessing the safety concerns of people with developmental disabilities, and they often try to mitigate those risks, although there's going to always be a risk because of the nature of the crime of exploitation. So.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to recognize that because people come with so many intersectionalities, we want to make sure that we are partnering for people who do have some expertise in those particular intersectionalities that may have led to the vulnerabilities or led to exploitation. So, you know, if we're working with somebody with a particular type of disability or an intersectionality, it's really important that we reach out and say, we're working with someone with this type of disability, please inform me. So, you know, the person with the disability doesn't have to necessarily inform me, but I want to try and get as much information about that disability as well. And then pair that with my interactions with my person so that I have the best assessment that I can make. Because we're also assessing who are the formal supports in this person's life, who are the informal supports that are in this person's life, so that we can partner with that person's consent, of course, partner with those organizations or those informal supports to do just what Maddi said, which is to mitigate the risks. So, you know, there's no way for any of us to be experts in all the different types of disabilities or all of the intersectionalities. But when we see those intersectionalities coming forward, it's up to us to reach out and say, okay, I need some help in understanding this and in my relationship with the person that I'm working with, and to make sure I'm not missing something. So help me to understand what I could be missing, what I have missed, so that I can try and mitigate that risk.
So there is I will read the last message, and maybe we can, you know, leave in a good note here. And thank you so much for everybody. So somebody said, I really appreciate, Maddi, your comment on it's up to us, to as service providers, to educate ourselves on the particular disability, and not the role. This is not the role of the individual themselves, and this should be a continuous process. And I think it's important for us that if we do not have professional development, we make sure that we research on our own, or be part of take a training and professional development in this area. I want to thank Maddi and Shelley, and all of you. Thank you so much for your engagement. I will see all of you next week with our next webinar. I hope that all of us learn something from the experience shared today. Have a good day. Enjoy the sun if you are in Ontario.
Bye.
Bye.